We're proud to support the craft of journalism. UBS brings you the latest news from around the world with The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Be part of an international network that brings together leading insights, research, and technology across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the center of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 26th of August 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist. I'm Vincent McAviney. Coming up this morning.
My concern is that the operational success of the most recent strikes on Iran might persuade the Iranian leadership that their only hope now is to actually cross the weapons threshold.
German, French and British officials prepare to meet their Iranian counterparts in Geneva. US defense chiefs are prioritizing rare earth materials. And then
we see that AI is something that nobody can avoid, right? And we feel that the AI-driven personalized wellness program is something that's going to be very big.
We take a look at the future of Thailand's wellness industry. And why is the solar weather worth keeping an eye on too? Plus a roundup of the latest news from Switzerland and the day's newspapers. That's ahead on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. At least 20 people, including 5 journalists, are reported to have been killed in an Israeli airstrike on a hospital in southern Gaza. President Trump has said he will immediately remove Lisa Cook, the first black woman to serve on the Federal Reserve's Board of Governors, from her position in a major escalation in his battle against the US Central Bank. And South Africa's government is warning young women not to fall for viral social media recruitment drives promoting job opportunities abroad, particularly in Russia. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. But first, 2 months on from US strikes on some of Iran's nuclear facilities, the E3, Germany, France and Britain have resumed nuclear talks with Tehran as the threat of revived sanctions looms. We're joined now by Dr. Marian Mesmer, Senior Research Fellow in International Security at Chatham House. Dr. Marian, thanks for speaking with us. First, what do we know about these talks?
These talks come at a really crucial time. I mean, the situation with Iran has been complicated for several months now, but we are, as the autumn approaches, we're getting into an even more complicated time period, and that's for 2 reasons. One is because this opportunity to snap back sanctions on Iran is actually due to expire in the middle of October, and so this is one of the last opportunities that the former JCPOA members still have that mechanism to actually exert pressure on Iran. And the other challenge is also that Russia is about to assume the presidency of the Security Council, also from October on. And so because there's a 30-day window from triggering the sanction snapback until when it is in action, the 31st of August is one of the last opportunities where they can trigger this without any fears of Russia interfering, which are there, of course, because Russia and Iran have become much closer since 2022 than they were when the Iran deal was originally negotiated.
And what would those snapback sanctions look like?
So these are sanctions that were in place essentially before the Iran deal was reached in 2015. They are a package of 6 resolutions that the Security Council had passed, and they are really extensive sanctions on Iran's missile program, Iran's nuclear program, and also sanctions on various assets, various travel sanctions for high-ranking Iranian officials. And they were essentially a range of measures that the global community had put in place in order to control Iran's nuclear program and missile program, while there were already concerns about Iran working on nuclear weapons and essentially extending what they were allowed to do in terms of their peaceful nuclear program.
And the European nations meeting, I mean, they didn't partake sort of directly in the strikes themselves a few weeks ago. What are relations like for them with Iran currently?
I mean, their relations with Iran are a lot better than US-Iranian relations, which are essentially not really functioning at the moment. But at the same time, because they have taken the approach of trying to coordinate with the US in an attempt to provide some sort of continuity for a potential resumption of the Iran deal, Iran is cautious in engaging with them. So Iran has for a long time tried to maintain individual relationships with all parties to the Iran deal. So that was also China and Russia. And then, of course, the E3 as well as the United States. But Iran essentially tried to use that after the Iran deal broke apart in a way to see where it could get the most leverage. And so from Iran's perspective, it's not ideal that the UK, France and Germany are coordinating with the US. And one of the things that are on the table is essentially the US demand that Iran stop all nuclear enrichment, which for Iran at the moment is something that they're not willing to talk about.
Do we have any clearer sense now of how much damage June's strikes did on Iran's nuclear program and how much they were set back?
It's still really unclear, essentially because no independent inspectors have been able to assess those sites. But we've got a few different intelligence reports, and while they vary exactly in what they say the damages were, we can assume that the damages were not as wide-reaching as the US had hoped, in part because Iran had already been working on other enrichment sites. And one of the really key questions that's also on the table for this talks is where the existing enriched uranium has actually gone. The Iranian government at the moment maintains that it's buried underneath the rubble, which is a very convenient narrative for them because it means that they can't account for it. It means that they can't really show any cylinders or mark where it had gone. But we also have other accounts where we've got satellite footage that showed that some things were moved from these sites prior to the strikes, and some Iranian government officials had actually said at some point prior and briefly after the strikes that a lot of the uranium had already been moved. So I personally doubt that it really is buried. I think a lot of it was probably moved elsewhere.
And in terms of how the regime has been managing the fallout since domestically, do we have much of an insight on what's been going on?
Well, domestically, the position on the nuclear program is very much split. So for a lot of hardliners, the Israeli and US attacks on the nuclear program essentially mean that Iran needs to accelerate its nuclear weapons program and develop nuclear weapons in order to be able to deter any future attacks. But there are also
North Korea.
Exactly, the North Korea model, yes. But there are also a lot of more moderate voices in the country that are urging Iran to go back to the negotiation table, in part so that Iran actually has a chance of maintaining its peaceful nuclear program, which is really important to it. But also because the sanctions regime previously did a lot of economic damage to Iran, and it does put a significant amount of pressure on the civilian population. So for more moderate Iranian politicians, it's an opportunity to position themselves as being on the side of the people and against the regime.
And just finally, are there any signals we should be watching out for in these talks with the Europeans?
Well, something that's really significant, I think, is that there are unofficial side talks planned with the IAEA. And so if Iran was to agree some sort of resumption of an inspection regime, I think that would be a positive signal. So that's something that I'm looking out for.
Dr. Marian Mezmer, Senior Research Fellow in International Security at Chatham House, thank you very much. And we're going to stay on this topic because earlier Monocle's Andrew Muller spoke to Suzanne Maloney, Vice President and Director of Foreign Policy Programme at the Brookings Institution. She also served as an advisor on Iran policy to the administrations of Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama. The new issue of Foreign Affairs on Stands now features her article, Iran's Dangerous Desperation. Andrew began by asking her whether the Iranian regime has been surprised by how the last year or so has gone for them.
I think it's clear that the Iranian political elite has been taken aback by the stunning series of blows that they've experienced over the course of the past year. The surprise attacks that effectively decapitated Hezbollah and then reduced Hezbollah's very significant arsenal to a shadow of its former self were probably the first and most significant blow. That, which took place over the course of late 2024, really helped enable the Israeli strikes that took place in June of this year alongside American support and involvement, which I think have really done significant damage to Iran's nuclear program and exposed its relationships with Beijing and with Moscow as very, very ineffective in terms of defending the regime. What we've seen is, an Iranian leadership that seems to be reeling, that, sought to effectively curtail the war by declining to escalate as they typically do. And I think that really just exposed an awareness of the weakness of their own position.
If you're Israel or the United States right now, it's probably tempting to think, well, we can just whack them whenever and they may happen to get out of hand in future. It worked once, it will work again. But is there an opportunity here for something perhaps a bit more constructive and perhaps a bit more lasting? Has Iran's current turmoil created a diplomatic opportunity for, if not necessarily the United States, then somebody?
I think that there is an opportunity and a need for diplomacy, but it's not clear the Iranians are right now in a position or a mood to deal constructively. They've been engaging in talks with the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, about returning to some kind of cooperation with the agency, which of course is the mode for ensuring that Iran's program remains a civilian program rather than being used toward military purposes. That's going to be very critical to any pathway forward, but they haven't yet made any real concessions. They're appearing to, put off the possibility of negotiations directly with the United States, which had been, of course, underway at the time of the attacks back in June. That's going to be, I think, a critical milestone for any path forward. The Trump administration has demonstrated a degree of creativity about these negotiations. They've suggested that, in fact, there may be ways for the United States to be involved in various efforts to build confidence around Iran's nuclear program, but they've also held to a much stricter line than the Obama administration used in terms of Iranian access to enrichment. That was a key demand of the Iranians during the prior rounds of nuclear negotiations, and it does not appear that they're prepared to walk away from it today.
Which brings us, I guess, to the really big question, if we think of Iran as a potential danger, and this is the question that has hung over us all for years now, but if they could build a nuclear weapon, if they still have that capacity, given what they have absorbed over the last 8 or 9 months, is that something they would still dare attempt?
Well, my concern, and this is the focus of the article that I wrote in this month's edition of Foreign Affairs, is that the Iranians are going to be more determined to try to cross the weapons threshold with respect to their nuclear program as a result of the success of the American and Israeli attacks on their nuclear infrastructure, as well as the prior track record of the erosion of their proxy militias around the region. They are looking for some kind of an existential safeguard, and the nuclear program, having a nuclear deterrent, would be a way to keep the regime in power and would be a way to ward off future attacks. And so my concern is that the operational success of the most recent strikes on Iran might persuade the Iranian leadership that their only hope now is to actually cross the weapons threshold.
That was Suzanne Maloney, Vice President and Director of Foreign Policy Programme at the Brookings Institution. We also heard from Dr. Marion Messmer, Senior Research Fellow in International Security at Chatham House. This is The Globalist. It's 7:13 here in London and 2:13 in Washington, D.C. The US Department of Defense has invested $400 million in MP Materials, a mining company which extracts and processes rare earth minerals, and it also produces magnets. The Pentagon's investment gives it a roughly 15% stake and makes it the largest shareholder in MP Materials. But why has it done this and why now? To discuss, we're joined by H.J. Mai, journalist based in Washington, D.C. H.J., what's the thinking here?
Well, good morning, Vinny. The thinking here is really, as you can imagine, the investment is really to push back against China. China is really dominating, this market of rare earth minerals, not only the extraction of it, but also the processing of the rare earth materials. And, as you might know, and as listeners might know, those elements, those rare earths are a total of 17 elements. They really drive our modern technologies, whether it's the smartphone that we all have in our pockets, or in the case of the Department of Defense, they're used for really advanced military equipment and weapon systems. And so this is really an investment that goes to the heart of this, to push back against China and to really invest in an industry that the US has fallen back. I mean, and MP Materials, which operates a huge open pit mine around Las Vegas, actually in California, right on the border between Nevada and California, is the largest mine of this kind in the US. And so this investment is really a strategic one and probably just the first of many.
And what more can you tell us about MP Materials, and why did the Pentagon choose this particular company for its investment?
Yeah, it goes to what I alluded to just earlier. It's the largest mine. I mean, back in 2022 is one of the where the latest data is available. MP Materials produced around close to 16% of all global supply of rare earths elements, and so this investment is just to further this. One of the things that has made it hard for mining in general, not just for rare earth, but in general, to operate in the US and in other Western countries is obviously, the cost. Just like any other market, elements are traded globally. And so, prices are up and down, they're falling. And so part of this deal is that the Pentagon actually promises MP Materials a certain price, for their mining. And so this gives the company very much security, planning security going forward. And so the other thing is that this investment in rare earth elements that are also used to produce magnets, which is really the component that we use in all those products that I mentioned before. This will include an investment in a new facility to produce those really highly advanced magnets. Up to $1 billion has been already committed. And so it all, it's just MP Materials is the biggest. It's the largest at the moment. And so it just makes sense to start with an investment in this company.
And this is an investment in a single company. Does this really do anything to cut into China's dominance in this market?
Well, not initially, but it sets the tone. I talked to Ian Lang. He's an economist with the Colorado School of Mines, and he really thinks this is just the start, as I mentioned.
DOD is coming in here and now putting in some operational subsidies, meaning like value to actually producing these things as opposed to capital subsidies from the past. And hopefully this is part of DOD's push to sort of like force the defense industrial base to get serious. All of the models that were predicting large increases in rare earth demands, really we're seeing it come from the offshore wind and the EV industry. The outlooks for those two industries have not gotten better. One outlook that has gotten better is obviously the defense industry, with all these NATO countries, pledging to increase their spending. So. Mm-hmm.
As Ian just said here, one of the real important industries here is the defense industry. And rare earth is just one component. We also just heard that the U.S. Is investing another $500 million to create a stockpile of cobalt, which is not a rare earth mineral or element, but a critical element that's also used in many advanced industries. So this is really, just the beginning, and it's just a different type of industrial policy that the Trump administration is really pursuing here.
Yeah, I mean, direct meddling in the market, really. And in terms of, you mentioned them having this sort of mine outside of Las Vegas. I mean, how much of this kind of stuff does the US have currently in the soil? But Are they also going to have to work with sort of allies like Australia and nations in Africa, which have sort of deep supplies of this kind of stuff too?
Yeah, absolutely. When I talked with Ian, with the economist from the Krauss School of Mines about this, the cooperation with allies is really important here. The U.S. cannot by itself, push back against China's dominance here. It needs to cooperate with Australia, with other countries in South America. Obviously there are some plans to get mines, started in Europe, and so the cooperation between allies is really important here. One of the things that is also critical when it comes to this is to see if this strategy of really investing really makes a difference. So this is a new approach, as Ian Lang mentioned, but it's one that has so far been seen as a positive one to provide this direct investment. We've also seen it in recent days with a stake that the government has taken in a chip manufacturer like Intel. And so, this all really goes to boosting industries that are critical for the future, whether that's once again in the defense space or in other spaces, but that make sure that supply chain disruptions, as the ones that we've seen during the pandemic, are not affecting Western countries as much. And so this is really all part of this new strategy.
H.J. Mai, thank you very much. This is The Globalist.
Each of us has a craft, a calling that inspires us. Whether it's how a coffee is brewed, a chair is built, or how money is looked after. There's a love for the work, a care that compels you forward. For us at UBS, it's about designing a unique outcome for you. Because whatever your craft may be, ours is built around helping you succeed. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Well, let's continue now with today's newspapers. Joining me is Jack Dickens, journalist and historian who writes about Europe, America and the Middle East. He is the commissioning editor at Engelsberg Ideas. Jack, good to have you in the studio. World leaders going to Washington these days know that the Oval Office is effectively a reality TV show, and one yesterday got burnt by this, didn't he?
Well, we all remember the dramatic scenes back in February when Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, ventured into the Oval Office and came off rather worse for wear. There is a slightly happier story this time around. The new Korean president, Lee Jae-myung, who's been in office since June, went to visit President Donald Trump in the Oval Office. His visit didn't get off to a good start. He was mauled on Truth Social as Donald Trump accused him of carrying out a purge or revolution. But thankfully, things did get slightly better after their meeting. He praised Donald Trump as presiding over a renaissance in American manufacturing. He said that he's a great peacemaker and should bring peace to the Korean peninsula. So they managed to smooth over some of those differences in the end, thankfully.
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, he sort of said that they were unstable. We know he had a sort of close relationship in his first term with North Korea's leadership. I mean, if you're a world leader, are you sort of watching all of these interactions to see how to game out what you do?
I think so, and I think actually on the positive side, the United States allies in Asia and in Europe have been getting quite good at gaming the Trump game, I think. They know how to smooth over his ego. They know the buttons to press to get the Trumpometer going in the positive direction. So I think observing these meetings closely is something that diplomats will be doing from now on.
And your next story, we're heading to Russia and some issues for the middle class.
Yes, that's right. And I picked up on this from a very good long read in The Telegraph, which shows just how profoundly Russian society has been transformed by the war in Ukraine so far. Entire swathes of the economy are now operating on what one Russian economist has called deathonomics. And that means that they have become so closely wedded to the war effort that it becomes very hard for them to see how it might end.
But obviously that's not the section of society that's giving up its sons and daughters to go to the front line.
That's right. This is the section of society, what you might call the Russian left-behinds. So those who are in the areas that became very depressed economically and deindustrialized after the fall of the Soviet Union. Their sons have been given these golden handshakes and these life-changing salaries to go and fight on the front lines in Ukraine.
And in terms of the sort of middle class, I mean, what kind of things are they getting from Deathonomics? Where is the investment coming?
Well, they're getting, as I said, these life-changing salaries. They're also getting compensation if their sons die on the front line. So you've got this sort of unprecedented injection of capital and resources into these areas, which are then being spent on services, sort of hair salons, gyms, and all these sorts of things. But they also have other perks. And one of the most significant things, I think, is that university places are being given to people from these areas in Siberia and the Caucasus who would never have dreamed of going to top universities in Moscow and Petersburg. And I think the implications of that could be very profound for Russia's social order moving forwards.
And do you think, elections in Russia are always marred in controversy. Is this going to sort of give Vladimir Putin an even stronger hold, perhaps, on the electorate?
It's interesting, isn't it? I think it gives him a stronger hold so long as the war continues. But I think, and this is a lesson for European leaders here, I think if Putin is bound into a peace over Ukraine and he has to demobilise his forces, it will be very interesting to see what happens next, because suddenly you have all of these families who've been dependent on these injections of cash coming from sons fighting on the front lines. And then after a peace arrangement, hundreds of thousands of them will be demobilised, and that tap will be shut off.
And moving now to France, Paris has summoned the Italian ambassador. What happened here?
So, yes, as you say, the Italian ambassador has been summoned. This followed remarks from the Italian Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini, not a man known for his diplomatic approach to things. It followed his remarks about French President Emmanuel Macron's call for European militaries to put boots on the ground in Ukraine to secure any peace agreement that might emerge from the war.
And that's, Deputy Prime Minister has a very strange and close relationship with Russia, doesn't he?
He does. I think in many ways he's an ideological fellow traveller with Vladimir Putin. He feels a sort of instinctive sympathy with some of Putin's concerns. But it is also significant, I think, because it would be easy to dismiss this as just Salvini being Salvini, but it speaks, I think, towards a greater discontent among some European countries with how countries such as Britain and France are approaching negotiations in Ukraine.
But his own boss was in the White House, a week ago, part of this sort of so-called coalition of the willing. She seems to be fully on board with it.
Of course, but the coalition of the willing is not necessarily united in what it's willing to do. And, of course, Giorgia Meloni has taken a very strong lead in saying that there should be a NATO-like security guarantee for Ukraine. That means that Ukraine will not have NATO membership, but it will receive some kind of security backing from NATO powers. However, earlier in the year, she was very quick to pour cold water on this idea that boots would be put on the ground. She's keen to sign up to an agreement whereby European militaries will guarantee Ukraine's security, but she doesn't want to see European armies being put into Ukraine.
And finally, there's some dancing going on in Osaka. What's this?
Yes, of course. The Japanese are dancing, and this really interesting phenomenon, I think, shows that it's never too late to learn how to dance, and elderly Japanese people, those who are middle-aged and older, are going to these senior disco events and having fun.
What kind of stuff are they doing? I mean, is this sort of recapturing their youth?
I think it's a bit of recapturing their youth, but I gather these are also very family-oriented events. They're very social. People go along, and they also do sort of, safe stretching and all these sorts of things that you should do when you're older. But on a serious note, I think there is something in this. I mean, we wonder why, for example, the Japanese are so healthy and why they have such good outcomes when it comes to living into older age. And I think actually it's because they do things like this, and they do go and meet in public, and that combats loneliness and helps them to stay fit.
Jack Dickens, thank you very much. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. At least 20 people, including 5 journalists, are reported to have been killed in an Israeli strike on a hospital in southern Gaza. The office of Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu dubbed it a tragic mishap, while earlier the IDF claimed it does not target journalists. President Trump has said he will immediately remove Federal Reserve official Lisa Cook from her position in a major escalation in his battle against the US Central Bank. In response, Cook, the first black woman to serve on the Fed's Board of Governors, has said Trump has no authority to fire her and she will not resign. And South Africa's government is warning young women not to fall for social media recruitment drives promoting job opportunities abroad. It comes after a number of videos by South African social media influencers advertising jobs for young women in Russia have gone viral. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Well, it is 9:29 in Beirut and 8:29 in Rome. Since his election 3 months ago, Pope Leo has kept a fairly low profile in the confines of the Vatican. But there's growing anticipation that Lebanon could be the destination for the first trip as pontiff later this year. The Vatican is still finalising details, but such a visit would carry powerful symbolism. Lebanon, a country of deep religious diversity, has often been seen as a bridge between faiths. It would also put the Pope closer to the Middle East conflicts he has repeatedly urged the world to end. To discuss this, we're joined by Juliet Linley, journalist and former Vatican correspondent. Juliet, there was such a frenzy when the first American Pope was appointed back in May, but he's been somewhat quiet since. How has he spent his summer getting used to the job?
Hi, Vinny. Yes, so he kind of flitted between the scorching Vatican City this summer and Castel Gandolfo, that's the papal summer residence just south of Rome, where, remember, Pope Francis never went in his whole 12 years in the papacy, but traditionally popes always left the city and went there in the hot summer months. So he's recently been marking his first 100 days in office, and these 100 days they've been spent pretty much steadying the ship for Leo after Francis's perhaps unpredictable moments during the latter part of his pontificate. But let's say that most recently, Pope Leo on August 22nd, for instance, he called for a day of fasting and prayer for peace. And that was focusing on the conflicts in Ukraine and in the Middle East. And at the same time, this being the height of summer, Vinny, he also receives a lot of gifts. And one of those gifts was a table tennis table that had the papal coat of arms on it. So I thought you'd be interested to know that he was probably doing a spot of ping pong this summer too.
Oh, okay. So why would Lebanon be such a meaningful choice for Pope Leo's first trip abroad?
So if confirmed, and Vinny, let's emphasize this, the Vatican is mum on this reportedly upcoming apostolic trip. It would be highly symbolic. It would send the message to the world that Leo's very serious about trying to help in in whatever way possible to bring peace to the troubled Middle East, in whatever way he can. Now, I said the trip isn't confirmed, but it's often the local churches of the countries that a pope is set to visit that let the proverbial cat out of the bag. And in this case, it's Lebanon's Catholic Cardinal Bishara Boutros Rai, the patriarch of the Maronite Church of Lebanon. It was he that confirmed that by the end of the year, by December, Leo would probably be visiting Lebanon. And now, of course, Vinny, I was about to call you Pope Leo. Vinny, we cannot underestimate the security concerns of such a trip, the geopolitical insecurity, as well as, the threats of violence. So it's perhaps not surprising that the Holy See press office is not confirming as yet. But a lot of prep obviously goes into a papal visit. So I guess this cardinal does have pretty good intel.
And popes often set the tone for their leadership with their early travels. What message do you think he might be wanting to send with a visit to Lebanon? And what's he like in terms of engaging with the public that we've seen so far?
He's very affable. He's very likable kind of a pope. He's reached out a lot to the young people, if you will. And remember that in May, there was talk that Leo might be going to Turkey. Now, that was a trip that would have marked a key anniversary for the Orthodox Church, the 1700th anniversary of the Council of Nicaea. Now, it's possible, Vatican watchers are saying, that Leo could combine Turkey and Lebanon in one fell swoop. Now, that would be interesting. That would obviously give the Catholic Church the perfect pulpit, if you want, from which to shine the spotlight on bringing peace to the Middle East, but also on Christian persecution in the region, which is a big problem. And like his outspoken predecessor, Francis was often calling for, Pope Leo has also called often for dialogue, especially with regards to Gaza. And he's also sending, as we said, a strong interfaith message, because don't don't forget, Lebanon has a very particular sectarian power-sharing structure. With its population of 6 million, it's a Middle Eastern country with the largest Christian population, around 2 million, and the remaining 70% are Muslim. But it's also the only Arab country with a Christian head of state, a Maronite Christian. So it'd be symbolic in so many ways.
And there is the ongoing war in Gaza. There are tensions across the region. Could the Pope's voice realistically sort of have an influence on peace efforts, or might this particular Pope get caught up because he is American?
We're waiting to see just how much his Americanness will influence global politics, whether he will perhaps have more of an ear in Washington. We're still waiting to see that. And let's also remember that he is half Peruvian, so he's not just an American Pope. But having said that, we've had this discussion several times on air about, just how much of a role can the Pope really play? But listen, he has the ears of 1.3 billion Catholics. It's a pretty large following. He's also got the smallest army in the world, but that's another story. But it's all about soft power, Vinny, and it's kind of hard to quantify. But when the Pope speaks, certainly the international media listen, they follow him. Whenever he goes on his big international trips, there's a huge media scrum. And international leaders, they all sort of flock to the Vatican City at some point, whether it's just for a photo op or whether it's for more in-depth talks with the Pope. So you can't underestimate his soft power, but just how much of a role he will play in the current circumstances, in this current situation that the world is in, I can't answer that right now.
And looking back at past papal visits, John Paul II was a real global traveller. It felt like Benedict, less so. Francis in his earlier tenure did, but as we see with sort of popes, the longer they go on, the health tends to take over. Do you think international travel is going to be a big part of the sort of, first decade or so of Pope Leo's sort of legacy building?
Well, let's look at his age. He's not yet 70, so that puts him in the very young category when it comes to popes. But also, if you want to take a historical perspective, international travel can really shape what message a pope sends, but also what legacy he leaves. Let's look at Pope Paul VI, for instance. Well, he was the first in the modern era to take an international trip. Back in 1964, he went to the Holy Land. He met with the ecumenical patriarch in Jerusalem, and that was a big historical step that even today is remembered often, and it went towards at least trying to heal the rift between, let's say, Catholics and Orthodox Christians. You mentioned John Paul II. That trip to Poland in 1979 during the Cold War, it was huge. He galvanized the Polish people. He inspired, if you want, the solidarity movement. And he's praised today for having helped even contribute to the collapse of Soviet influence in the Eastern European bloc, if not for the collapse of the entire Iron Curtain. And then you just mentioned Pope Francis. Yes, he had difficulty in the latter years traveling, but he still kept up a huge agenda, even flying to different parts of the world, including Asia, I think, in the last year of his papacy. But a very important trip, let's say, for instance, for Pope Francis was back in 10 years ago. It was 2015, and he went to the US, and it was momentous. That sort of did leave some sort of a legacy for him. He addressed Congress, he addressed the UN, he emphasized social justice, he emphasized compassion for migrants, all topics that are still so current today. And of course, he brought up climate change.
And you touched on it there with Pope John Paul II, returning to Poland. That was pivotal. Could it actually be in the sort of time of his papacy that a trip home to America might be not only incredibly difficult because of how divided a society it is, but might it be one that he sort of saves for a little while to sort of get used to global travel, perhaps even wait until Donald Trump is out of the White House until he goes there?
Your guess is as good as mine, but it sounds like a pretty good hypothesis. I wouldn't be surprised if he's not going to jump straight on a plane for Washington. And remember, he might, if we're talking about popes visiting their home countries, he might make a trip to Lima and visit Peru far sooner than he does the US. But look at Pope Francis. He never went to Argentina. There were very strong reasons for which he absolutely went to so many Latin American, South American countries, but he chose to stay out of Argentina because he didn't want to get involved in domestic politics. So let's see how it is with Leo.
Juliet Linley, journalist and former Vatican correspondent, thank you very much. You're listening to Monocle Radio. Located in the seaside town of Hua Hin, Thailand, the legendary Chiva Som Wellness Resort has just marked its 30-year anniversary. The family-run business now includes an outpost in the Middle East, which is celebrating winning the Best Luxury Sustainable Resort Development in Qatar at the Luxury Lifestyle Awards. Kwon Krip Ronjanastian, chairman and CEO of Chiva Som, joined Monocle's Tom Webb in Midori House in London to give us a peek into his booming brand and its future.
It's just shifting in the past few years, particularly after COVID. First of all, the age average is dropping. That means, much more awareness, much more requirements, demands from the younger segments. And also more demand, more purchasing power from Asia, India, China, Southeast Asia. So, the faces of clientele are changing, the demographics are changing, and geography changing.
And what do the younger demographic want? Why are they so demanding? What are they trying to get from your offering?
They're looking for something that is not just a spa or fitness. They're looking for benefits from wellness in particular, and what kind of lifestyle change they need to make to achieve it. What technology can play a role in all this evolution. We see that AI is something that nobody can avoid, right? And we feel that the AI-driven personalized wellness program is something that's going to be very big. The data that the AI can acquire and accumulate and then analyze and deliver is so big, fast, very timely that everyone wants. And one of the things that drives that is the wearable, like the one I'm wearing today. It gives you your heart rate, your calorie burn, right, the intensity level of your exercise, and so on. And, even quality of sleep, it can tell you something about that. So it's all facets of life, where improvements can be made, especially in this world where the world is moving very fast, information travels quickly. How do you handle the stress, the pressure that comes with it? This is why the younger generation is interested.
And in your physical space, talking about authenticity, how do you create a truly authentic Thai experience?
And that's up to our innate talents of our therapists. The Thais have always had that, passed down the generation. The soft touch. We're a very tactile culture. When you see the elderly, you go up, give them massage, touch. It's very normal. So that gives us an advantage when we come to treating individuals, treating people who are in need of that sense of intimacy, sincerity, and convincing them that what we're delivering is the best solution. It may not be what they want, because people may want something that they think they need, and it's not really what they want. For instance, someone might come and say, I've eaten so badly, the past 6 months because of my travel schedules, my meetings, and so on. So I'd like to go on a weight loss or detox program. Now, if you were just sitting there and just making bookings, you would just book, okay, here's the detox, here's the weight loss. But we tend to consult each other, we tend to talk to each individual and just find out the root cause of the problem rather than the symptoms. And then we might find that, during meetings, they're eating compulsively. It's just a habit, right? So we might recommend something like stress management instead of digital detox or weight loss to best suit what they need.
Now, a lot of the experience that people receive comes from the talent, from the staff. In Europe, we have a big hospitality problem, not finding the right staff. A lot of people left the industry. How is it for you in Thailand to recruit and retain such brilliant talent?
One of the factors that is so important is our Chiva Som Academy. We actually have a training school, and we've established for a long time, 15 years, I think, roughly. And anybody going to work in our resort would have to go through the relevant training programs. And we also take in outsiders, people who want to be therapists themselves or want to manage their own spas. We also train them. So that's one way of getting around the what we call a manpower shortage nowadays, because everyone wants a therapist, everyone's opening a spa, a wellness center, and so on. And the other measure is that we retain a very tight network of the people who have worked with us, that have gone, say, overseas, gone to other places. And then, a lot of them for remuneration purposes, for gaining new experiences and so on. We tend to keep in touch with them, and we know where they are in the world, what they're doing. So when it's time for them to come back, it's quite simple. They get in touch, and we have availability. They're back, and we know what they've been doing. We're up to date. In fact, most of them have gone and acquired more experience, more knowledge. So that's beneficial to us. So the turnover problem, yes, everyone worries about, but it's not all negative.
No. Now, I wanted to talk to you about markets you're interested in, expanding the business. We have to talk about Qatar. How is that going?
Qatar is going well, gaining a lot of traction among the locals and the neighboring countries. But because of the geopolitical circumstances today, that's where the focus is. But we've actually generated interest from Europe, from Asia, because what we're offering there that is quite new is family wellness. The circumstance, the facilities, the practitioners that help you narrow that gap, that generational gap. It's not just a kids' camp. It's not just a place where you can come and leave your kids and then you go out and have a spa treatment. You actually requested to spend a few hours in activities with your children, something that requires a teamwork, team spirit, learning together, like cooking class, outdoor games, tailored for each family. And then when they spend the quality time together, they learn more about each other. They find out ways of narrowing the gap. The gap is widening today, I think, because of the social media, for example. People get so hung up on it, and that affects the kid as he grows up. And we don't want that to happen. The Qataris definitely have this vision, they call it Qatar 2030 vision, which aims to create a more productive, younger generation, more aware, more ready, to compete in the world.
That was Kuan Krip Rojanastian, Chairman and CEO of Chivasom, in conversation with Monocle's Tom Webb. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio.
IQ, EQ, and AI. 3 components key to the craft of innovation at UBS. Because to stay ahead in a rapidly evolving age, you need a partner with decades of experience, endless passion for the work, and a finger on the pulse of leading technologies, bridging human expertise with artificial intelligence, all to elevate you. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Now, for the latest news from Switzerland, I'm pleased to say our producer Desi Abandli joins us now from Monocle's Zurich studio in Dufelstrasse 90. Desi, good to have you on the programme. And I've taken one of these myself last year in San Francisco, and it was incredible. Robo-taxis are coming, though, to Switzerland now.
Good morning, Vinny. Yeah, they are. So it was just announced yesterday that the Chinese company Baidu is planning to bring them to Switzerland, as you said. They will open an office in Zurich, which is great, obviously, for us here, because Pinterest has just announced recently they will also do the same. But they won't bring the taxis to the cities. So basically, what they want to sell us is, and it kind of makes sense because the transport here in the cities is generally very good, public transport. And they're saying we want to be an addition, but in like the small villages outside of towns, when you don't really, or sometimes you don't really have the best connections. So that's what they announced yesterday, which is very exciting. And they did actually then they did a really funny illustrations of a car driving like kind of through the fields of cows.
Oh, that's interesting. So they're going to target places where perhaps the public transport options are limited. What's the reaction been like?
I think because they want, so their plan, they haven't announced yet with who, but they plan to work with local partners, and it said with like the local post buses, we call them here. And therefore, I think it could work because that kind of means it's integrated within the system. So their idea is that they can kind of wait when a train arrives in one of those villages. So it's not really the idea to take away from the public transport, but to add to a system where maybe there aren't the greatest connections. So I think so far it's been received well. And especially for us, at least here in the city, with them opening an office and with them saying, look, we picked Switzerland because it's a neutral country, it offers stability. We picked Zurich because it's just great. It's a leading technology city. It has 2 very good universities, they said. So that's received very well here.
And the summer season is almost coming to an end. Switzerland, for a long time, was eager to get more tourists in, but like a lot of places, is now wanting to keep some of them out.
There is actually, there is this discussion of, well, it's a bit two-folded. One people are saying, yes, we do have this problem of over-tourism. Others are saying, we kind of do, but only in very specific regions. So there's this question of, how do you do that? How do you handle tourists? What should you do? And there's a really great example in the Tagesanzeiger about a small, really small village in Ticino that actually managed to get more tourists in and is now saying, oh, now we have them, but it's kind of too much now. We don't really have parking. We don't know where to put them. The locals complain. Tourists are not happy, which brings up this whole discussion here of how do we actually deal with tourists? Because as you said before, we were always like, please come, please come, please come. And now for the first time, there's a bit of a backlash, or shall I say, we try to think, where can we get tourists? Should we kind of try to get them to different places? Or
Yeah, it's something a lot of European cities and destinations have been sort of struggling with since the pandemic, sort of making sure that people know about the other options in the country.
Yeah, they actually make a funny point. They say, well, we can try to get them to different places, but then you can't really blame someone who looks at the Toblerones or the chocolate and sees the Matterhorn and then wanting to go there. It's a bit hard to then say, no, actually, pick a different mountain.
True. But somewhere that lots of tourists do like to go, though, is the lakes, and particularly lakes in Zurich. But there's an issue. Lots of people taking snaps around the waterside. They're losing their phones, but there's a new service to try and help them.
There is actually, and I didn't realize, first of all, I didn't realize we have this service, and I didn't realize it's that popular. So if you lose, and it doesn't even have to be a phone. I've heard recently someone dropped really expensive sunglasses. You can call the police, water police will come, will fish it out, like properly with a boat and divers and everything, and you only pay like 130, 140 euros for them to receive whatever you've dropped.
Oh, wow, that is quite a service for everyone taking selfies and
and they've actually, they said they don't even need to promote it because they do it like twice a day. It's quite, for them, it's a regular, easy thing to do. And yeah, people drop stuff, a lot of phones. I think it's mostly phones that people drop in the lake.
Yeah. Well, Desi Bandley, radio producer at our Zurich studio, thank you very much. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Now, for much of Europe, it's been an incredibly hot month with heat waves and wildfires across much of the continent. But the space weather has also been volatile over the past few days, with eruptions of massive solar flares, the biggest seen in more than a decade, though happily not in our direction so far. To find out what's been going on, we're joined by Tira Schubart, Fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society and Ambassador for the Science Museum. Tira, thank you for speaking to us. Firstly, why has the sun been so active recently and what's it been doing?
Well, that's a good question, Vincent. The sun is responsible for space weather, and space weather affects us in all kinds of ways. And the reason why space weather, which is solar activity, has been so intense recently is that it's at solar maximum. The sun goes in 11-year cycles, and we've just recently hit solar maximum, which just means that there's more geomagnetic storms, and they will burst out with these incredible things called coronal mass ejections, which is plasma, sometimes much, much larger than the size of the Earth. And if it's heading in our direction, it has a bit of a consequence. But it is what also brings us some beautiful things, the northern lights and the southern lights when it hits the poles. But it is a very hectic time up there on the sun right now at the solar maximum.
And are we able to sort of predict the weather going forward over the next few days? I mean, we said so far these flares have been directed sort of away from the Earth, but are we anticipating any coming towards us, and what would they do?
Well, we need to keep a good eye on it. So there's about 24 satellites that are observing the sun in different spectrums, which means some of them are looking at it in visible light, some in X-ray, some in ultraviolet. And then they will give warning, because when you have this ejection of plasma, it takes at least 15 hours to get to the Earth. However, if it's just a solar flare, it travels at the speed of light, and the speed of light will get from the sun to the Earth in just over 8 minutes. But it's a big plasma that is a problem, and it has all sorts of unexpected effects as well. One of which is how it affects migratory animals, which use the sun and use the geomagnetic qualities to navigate. So, I don't know, are you into racing pigeons?
Yeah, not racing pigeons, but I do like watching migratory birds.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, they get a bit confused when there's geomagnetic storms, but it might be a good time to invest in futures of racing pigeons, which might be down a bit, because they cost a decent little racing pigeon apparently cost about $3,000, but the Ferraris of the racing world are up to $500,000, and in fact, some of the racing pigeons, New Kim, one bred in Belgium, who apparently have a sideline in this, sold for $1.9 million. But the owners of these birds won't fly them when the sun, when solar weather goes up to a scale of 1. It's measured on the scale of 1 to 5. And you can check it out every morning.
Okay, so we're at solar maximum. How long will this period last? And in terms of effects that we might notice, humans, I mean, it can have effect on power grids, on satellite systems. Could we see anything like that?
We could. If it goes above 2 and 3, up to 5, the maximum, it can knock out satellite systems temporarily or even permanently. It also can affect GPS systems. So if you're flying, for example, across the Atlantic, the route of the flight may come further south, because the more northern you are, the closer you are to the poles, the more affected it is. But you can look at the solar weather every day if you look at some of the websites for the NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration in America. They're the big ones. So everyone subscribes to those. The power companies, because they want to protect their grid. Anyone that has satellites up in space, and all the airline companies. So your friends may be looking and seeing whether it's going to be sunny for a picnic. You can go and check whether it's going to be solar weather, big solar flares, big CMEs out there.
Okay. And just finally, so this solar maximum period, how much longer is it going to last?
Well, we probably have just passed a maximum, but because of the disruption it causes in the geomagnetic aspects of the sun, it'll probably be a bit rough and ready for the next year or two. So the tip here is, why don't you plan a trip to Iceland or up north in the Scandinavian countries this winter? Because it's going to be really good for auroras. I have been to Iceland before, and it was incredible. So, Tira Schubert, thank you very much for joining us. That's all for today's programmes. Thanks to our producers Tom Webb and Anita Riota. Our studio manager was Flynn Simons, who also provided editing assistance. After the headlines, there's more music on the way. The briefing is live at midday London time. The Globalist returns with me at the same time tomorrow. I'm Vincent McAviney. Thank you for listening.